Have you ever wondered who built the world's very first prison? Not Alcatraz, not a medieval castle, not even the Romans. The truth is far older than most people imagine. For most of human history, prisons didn't exist at all. If you traveled back 10,000 years, you wouldn't find iron bars, locked cells, or prison guards. You wouldn't even find a building meant to keep criminals inside. Because the earliest humans had a completely different idea of justice. Small groups of hunter-gatherers lived together in tribes of only a few dozen people. Everyone knew everyone else. Food was shared, work was shared, and survival depended on trust. If someone stole food from another family, attacked another member of the tribe, or refused to follow the group's rules, the punishment came quickly. Sometimes the offender had to repay what was taken. Sometimes they were publicly beaten. For more serious crimes, they were banished from the tribe. And in the worst cases, they were executed. Keeping someone locked up for months or years would have been impossible. Every person needed to hunt, gather food, and help the community survive. Feeding someone who contributed nothing simply wasn't an option. For thousands of years, this system worked. But then everything changed. Around 5,000 years ago, humanity began building the world's first great cities. In Mesopotamia, thousands of strangers suddenly lived together behind massive walls. Farmers, merchants, craftsmen, priests, soldiers, and rulers all shared the same streets. Trade expanded, wealth increased, and crime became much harder to control. A thief could steal from someone he had never met. A murderer could disappear into crowded markets. Kings realized they needed laws that everyone had to obey. One of the earliest rulers to solve this problem was King Hammurabi of Babylon. Around 1754 BC, he introduced one of the oldest written law codes in history. Nearly 300 laws covered theft, violence, business disputes, property, marriage, and punishment. Many people imagine these laws created prisons, but they didn't. Most criminals still received immediate punishment. Some paid heavy fines. Others were whipped. Some became slaves. The worst offenders were executed. So why build prisons at all? The answer was simple. Not everyone could be punished immediately. Some people had to wait for trial. Others needed to be questioned. Political enemies had to be held securely before judgment. So rulers began creating guarded buildings where prisoners could be kept temporarily. These were the world's first true prisons. They were never meant to be comfortable. They were places of waiting, dark, crowded, and dangerous. Ancient Egypt developed a similar system. Officials locked suspects inside guarded compounds while judges investigated their crimes. Some prisoners were sent directly into forced labor. Instead of sitting inside a cell, they spent their days hauling enormous stones, digging canals, and helping build temples for the pharaohs. For many prisoners, prison wasn't simply confinement. It was endless work under armed guards. As civilizations grew stronger, prisons became larger. The Assyrians, Persians, and Greeks all built places to hold criminals and prisoners of war. But it was the Romans who transformed imprisonment into something far more organized. Deep beneath the streets of ancient Rome stood one of history's most infamous prisons, the Mamertine prison. Built more than 2,500 years ago, it was little more than a stone chamber beneath the city. Prisoners entered through a hole in the ceiling. Many never came back out. The room was damp, almost completely dark. Fresh air barely reached inside. Food was scarce. Disease spread rapidly. Some prisoners waited only a few days before execution. Others slowly died where they sat. For Rome, prison was still not considered the punishment itself. It was simply the place where punishment began. Everything changed again during the Middle Ages. Across Europe, enormous stone castles began rising above the countryside. Hidden beneath many of them were underground dungeons. These were cold, damp rooms carved into solid rock. Sunlight almost never reached them. Fresh air was rare. The only sounds prisoners heard were dripping water, rattling chains, and footsteps echoing down narrow stone corridors. Kings imprisoned rebellious nobles. Lords locked away political rivals. Debtors, spies, captured soldiers, and accused criminals all disappeared behind heavy wooden doors reinforced with iron. Many prisoners never received a trial. Some waited months. Others waited years. A few were simply forgotten. For them, prison itself became the punishment. Then, around the 1700s, something unexpected happened. People began asking a new question. What if prisons could change criminals instead of simply punishing them? It was a radical idea. Until then, prisons had mostly been places where people waited for execution, exile, or forced labor. Now philosophers argued that criminals could become better people. Governments across Europe and later America began building a completely new kind of prison. Instead of large crowded dungeons, they built individual cells. Every prisoner slept alone. They followed strict schedules. They worked. They studied. Many prisons even required prisoners to read religious books, believing reflection and discipline could rebuild a person's character. One of the most famous examples was Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. When it opened in 1829, people around the world were amazed. Each prisoner lived in complete isolation. The designers believed silence would force criminals to think about their mistakes and become honest citizens again. Some prisoners improved. Others lost their minds from loneliness. Soon, governments realized there was no perfect prison. Some countries focused on punishment. Others focused on rehabilitation. As the Industrial Revolution transformed society, prisons became larger than ever before. Iron bars replaced wooden doors. Massive stone walls surrounded entire prison complexes. Guard towers watched every corner. New inventions like fingerprint records, photography, surveillance cameras, electronic locks, and DNA testing completely changed prison security. Escaping became harder with every generation. Yet prisoners never stopped trying. Some dug tunnels. Some climbed walls. Some disguised themselves as guards. Others spent years planning impossible escapes. Each successful escape forced prisons to become even more secure. Today, millions of people live inside prisons across the world. Some serve only a few days. Others spend their entire lives behind bars. Modern prisons look nothing like the ancient detention rooms of Babylon or the underground dungeons of medieval castles. But they all exist because humanity faced the same question thousands of years ago. What should society do with people who break its laws? The answer has changed countless times. From exile, to chains, to stone dungeons, to maximum security prisons watched by cameras every second of every day. The world's first prisons were never built to punish people forever. They were simply places to hold them. Over thousands of years, those temporary holding rooms slowly evolved into one of the most powerful institutions every civilization has ever created. Every prison standing today can trace its history back to those first locked doors built more than 5,000 years ago.